Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Bonzo. I'll be your professor for operations management. Welcome to the course. This is a course that is very near and dear to my heart. So as we get started, I'm going to give you a little bit of my background and why I personally love this content. And hopefully something that I talk about will resonate with you in terms of the type of work that you're currently doing or something that you would like to do in the future. My background is in industrial and operations engineering. I did my undergraduate work at RIT. While I was there, it's a co-op system. It's a 5-year program that weaves in co-ops. So we had to do co-ops. I did all of mine at Anheuser-Busch in Baldwinsville and also in St. Louis. And Anheuser-Busch was a wonderful company to work for. I learned so much about manufacturing, improving operations, project management, and I thought that I might just go and work there full time. As I was finishing up my program at RIT, though, I decided to do my master's there as well, and I was working on my master's thesis, and a professor said, I have an opportunity at a local hospital to use simulation techniques to optimize their surgical schedule. I ended up working on that for my master's thesis, and from the first time I stepped foot in the OR, I absolutely loved it, and I knew that healthcare was a place that I wanted to be in terms of using operations thinking to improve processes to help the patient. It had such a personal connection for me in seeing there and being with a patient and observing that relationship between the caregiver and the patient, but also seeing a number of opportunities for improvement. So I went on for my PhD in industrial and operations engineering again at the University of Michigan. And while in Ann Arbor, I did quite a bit of work with the University of Michigan Health System, with Henry Ford Health System. My advisor was Jeffrey Liker, who wrote the best-selling series of business books called The Toyota Way. And so I used lean techniques and thinking to understand how we could improve care delivery, both at kind of a macro level from the time the patient comes into the system to the time that they're discharged, and on through follow-up care, long-term care, whatever it may be, but also at a very granular level within different departments throughout the system. Absolutely fascinating to understand how those workflows worked, what the communication was, and where a lot of the gaps were in terms of creating issues with communication or a lack of transparency in terms of who was doing what and when it was happening. So there's always a lot of opportunity to just kind of sit there, observe processes, observe the workflows, talk with the people who are doing the work to find opportunities to make it a little bit better. While I was finishing up my dissertation, I did a case study at Rochester General Hospital, still had connections back in Rochester, and they offered me a full-time position as I was finishing up my PhD. I started off as a pretty traditional kind of lean process improvement person, working with clinical teams to figure out how we can improve workflows and improve quality and patient safety. And after a couple of years, was promoted to the director of the Transformation Management Office, which was a department that was formed primarily because the system had decided to implement Epic, which is an electronic medical record system, and it was going to require basically a complete overhaul of not only patient information and documentation, but also it would force us to think through our current existing workflows and what can and should change now that we have this new technology to support us. So in my role there, I had a team of project managers and facilitators that worked with me, and we would facilitate process improvement sessions between clinical team members and information technology, again, to understand what the existing workflow looked like, finding ways to improve it, and finding ways that we could use the Epic system to help us track the patient information, to improve communication, all for the sake of improving patient throughput and patient safety. So it was an absolutely fascinating project to be a part of. That took about 2 years. I saw that through to successful go live and completion, and actually stayed on for a bit afterwards as we went through an optimization phase and was trying to figure out what my next step would be. I always knew I wanted to come back to teach and do research, and I saw the posting at SUNY Oswego for a faculty position in the MBA program and the coordinator position for the MBA in Health Services Administration, which was a perfect blend of bringing in this kind of business, analytical, operational thinking to the healthcare industry. So I have been here ever since and absolutely love it. Even though I've been here since 2013, I wanted to make sure that I didn't lose my connection to industry. So I still do quite a bit of coaching and consulting. I was on contract with Montefiore Health System in the Bronx for 2 years and would go out there every 2 weeks or so and would work with a clinical team, primarily in the operating room and perioperative services, to think through how they could improve their supply chain, making sure they had the right supplies and equipment when the case was starting every single time, which is something that many operating rooms actually have a lot of trouble with. So improving their supply chain, and also looking at improving first case starts, turnaround time between cases, so that either you can bring on more cases because the operating room is typically the revenue generator for the hospital, or in the event that you don't need or want to bring on more cases, letting your team go at the end of the day and not forcing them to stay for overtime. So it was a really great project to be able to work with frontline team members to make sure that, you know, they found ways themselves to figure out how to improve their processes, so they could leave at the end of the day. They could have confidence that the system was going to work for them and enable them to take care of the patient the way they wanted to. So was working with them for about 2 years. For the past year, I've been working with Roland Borg, which is a company. You see the picture in the bottom right there. They create communication devices for health systems. So in the upper right-hand corner of that picture is the Responder 5. That's a unit that would go on the patient's wall, and it's a way for caregivers to basically communicate with one another. It provides some information to compile basically how efficient, keeping process data over time in terms of when certain caregiving tasks were done for the patient. It also is a way for the patient to communicate with their caregivers in case they need to get up or go to the bathroom, so that we can avoid patient falls, which is a major concern for most health systems. So in my position in supporting Roland, it's not only working with their team to help them understand and think through how lean thinking and process improvement can be a part of their system, but also partnering with their end users, with the hospitals where they're implementing this technology, to figure out how can they customize it to best meet their needs, to improve the processes they know that they're struggling with, again, to try to make improvements in patient throughput and patient safety. So aside from kind of my educational background and my professional background, I love operations management because it is literally in my backyard. My husband and I have a hop farm. So the Farm Brewers Act went into legislation in New York State about 5 years ago, and it requires that anybody that wants to be a craft brewer in New York State has to source a certain percentage of their resources from New York State. So it's a tiered system. So in 2016, 60% of your hops and barley have to be coming from within the state. And that goes up in 2019 and in 2021. And most states are following a similar kind of approach to building kind of the craft beer industry within their state, and making sure that it's tied in with getting these resources, sourcing them locally as well. So it's supporting the agricultural industry locally. So we thought, well, that would be really fun, right? It's a cool new crop, and to be a part of this is something that's really neat. So what we found is that after our first year of hop growing, we had about 300 plants. They grow on what is called a vine, which is like a vine, but it grows up 20 feet tall on a trellis system. And in order to harvest and to get the hops off, because up until this point, most of the hop farming had taken place in the Pacific Northwest at a very massive scale. They have huge $1 million facilities to do the harvesting, but there wasn't really a small-scale harvest machine or some way to automate the process. So when you're doing it by hand, it takes about an hour to do every single vine. We had 300 planted, not really considering the effort in the harvest. So we had to coax all of our friends and family to come over and help us, which is probably you're only going to get them to come out, for a year or two before, they're going to want something more. We give them food and company, but we knew that there had to be a better way. So my husband is a faculty member at RIT and thought, hey, I think I can design a piece of equipment that would harvest hops. Nothing was on the market at that point. There were some machines overseas, German machines that were 50 years old, and they had to be retrofitted. So there were people that are trying to find ways to do this, but nobody had come up with anything at this point. So my husband actually designed a machine, found somebody to partner with who was already making some agricultural equipment. They built a prototype, he got a patent, and it has become a full-fledged business. And now these hops harvesters, which you can see on the bed of the truck there, are in over 35 states in the United States. We have a number of machines in Canada, and now that the craft beer industry is really taking off overseas as well, we're starting to get a lot of interest from overseas as well. So it's kind of taken on a new life for me in terms of thinking about operations management, specifically the supply chain, because we are faced with making sure that we have reliable suppliers, that we're getting the best possible cost, that we can rely on them for quality, and for making sure that we're getting the pieces, the equipment on time, because we have demands coming in from the customers that we have to meet. Because harvest season takes place in a very short window, the last 2 weeks of August, we know we have to make sure we get all of our harvesters out, and they have to be functioning properly by that time. So it's completely taken on, again, new meaning for me in this effort. So it's been a lot of fun. That's me. That's my background. This is why operations management is so near and dear to my heart. And I hope that as you go through the semester, you can think about either the organization that you're working at or where you'd like to work, and how these operations management techniques might apply and help you and your company. So in terms of the course format and expectations, there will be 10 weekly assignments every week except for the weeks that we have an exam. They are due Monday at midnight. I find that tends to work best, especially for people that are working professionals, because that gives you the entire weekend to essentially do the homework and make sure that it's in by Monday night. You'll get 2 chances for every homework. So go ahead and submit your first time. It'll tell you whether or not you receive full credit or not for each question. And for those that you miss, you can go back and submit again, because again, I'm less concerned about you getting it right the first time and more about you getting a chance to kind of think through where you made a mistake and go back and refine your submission. With each homework assignment starting week 2, I'll also have an open-ended question at the end of the assignment, which will be geared towards having you think about whatever organization you choose for your project. I want you to start thinking about how those concepts apply. Since there are both undergrad and graduate students in this course, it's cross-listed between Management 310 and MBA 505. This is where I differentiate in terms of my expectations for the students. At an undergraduate level, I expect you to be pulling in course concepts and explaining how they might apply to the organization that you're analyzing. For graduate students, I expect you to take it much further. I expect you to bring in specific examples. I expect you to be doing research and working with somebody from that organization. I expect you to be pulling in some literature to help support why these techniques may or may not work for your organization and how they can and should be thinking about it differently. If you have questions about that, about my expectations, please let me know. That is also how I'll be differentiating in terms of my grading of the final class presentation. There will be 3 exams. They're timed exams, 3 hours each. There'll be a combination of multiple choice, short answer, and essay. As long as you're doing the homework and following through with the readings and the text, you should have absolutely no problem. The last exam will be given during finals week, and that'll be comprehensive. So that'll cover material throughout the course, but it will also be more heavily focused on the last few modules. Again, the class presentation, this is your opportunity to bring it all together, to really understand how these techniques, these methods, these tools apply to an organization that you're interested in improving. So I expect you to do a deep dive analysis on at least 7 of the 10 aspects of operations management that we'll go through throughout the course of the semester. And in terms of the presentation, it should be a 10, no more than 15-minute presentation that you're going to deliver in Panopto. Since you're doing your introductions in Panopto, hopefully you can troubleshoot any technical issues early. And again, that's where my expectations will differ in terms of the undergrad and the graduate students. So that, in a nutshell, that's me, your professor. That is the course, and I look forward to working with you all throughout the semester.